Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong simply because of how you looked, where you sat, or what others assumed about you? Imagine stepping onto a plane with quiet pride, holding a ticket your son bought you as a gift, only to be told, in front of strangers, that you don't deserve the seat you paid for. That's what happened to Ruth Ellis, a 71-year-old retired librarian with a heart full of grace. A flight meant to reunite her with family turned into a test of dignity, one that would expose hidden prejudice in the skies and spark a movement across the nation. If you were Ruth, would you have stood your ground or walked away in silence? And when the truth came out that her son was the black CEO of one of America's top companies, would you have chosen revenge or redemption? This isn't just a story about injustice. It's about quiet strength, compassion, and how one woman's calm courage forced the world to look in the mirror. Stay with us as we uncover the story behind Seat 2, where dignity learned to fly. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so more hearts can hear stories that remind us what respect truly means. The morning rush at Chicago Midway Airport carried its usual chorus of rolling suitcases and flight calls echoing through the concourse. Travelers moved like currents of a restless river, phones in hand, coffee in the other. Among them walked Ruth Ellis, a 71-year-old retired librarian with calm eyes and soft silver curls tucked beneath a navy beret. She held a small leather-bound Bible and a ticket that read First Class, Seat 2A. Her son, Marcus Ellis, had purchased it for her weeks earlier. To Ruth, it wasn't about luxury. It was about comfort. Her knees no longer liked long flights, and Marcus wanted his mother to arrive in New York rested for the company banquet that evening. Ruth arrived early. She always did. The gate area was full of sharp suits and glossy handbags, but she didn't notice. She was humming an old gospel tune under her breath, thumb resting between the pages of Psalms. When boarding was announced, she waited until her group was called, walking with measured steps down the jet bridge. The smell of coffee and airplane metal wrapped around her as she entered the cabin. First class shimmered with quiet authority leather seats, chilled champagne, travelers already absorbed in emails. Ruth smiled politely as she placed her small purse beneath the seat and eased down into 2A. She let out a soft sigh, the kind that belongs to a woman who has earned her peace. Then came a shadow at her shoulder, a woman's voice smooth but edge cut through the soft hum. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Ruth looked up. The badge on the flight attendant's chest read, Evelyn Ross. Her posture was practiced, chin lifted, smile tight. Ruth handed over her ticket without hesitation. Evelyn studied it, frowned slightly, and looked back at the passenger list on her tablet. "Mrs. Ellis," she said slowly. "This seat is reserved for first class." Ruth tilted her head. "Yes, dear, that's what my ticket says." Evelyn's expression didn't soften. "I see. Sometimes reservations get mixed between cabins. Did someone at the counter upgrade you?" Ruth blinked once, surprised by the question. "No one upgraded me. My son booked it that way." Across the aisle, a businessman paused his typing, eyes flicking up. The cabin's temperature seemed to drop by a few degrees. Evelyn offered a professional smile that failed to reach her eyes. "Let me just verify with the gate." She turned sharply and walked back toward the galley, heels striking the floor in small declarations of doubt. Ruth folded her hands over her Bible and waited. Her heartbeat was steady. Years of life had taught her the patience of storms. At the galley, Evelyn whispered to another crew member, "Tom Bennett, a tall man with the posture of someone used to small performances." Tom smirked. Maybe she wandered in by mistake. Happens all the time. Evelyn sighed. "Just check her again." Politely, he approached with an easy grin. "Morning. Ma'am, sorry to bother you. Could I double-check your boarding pass?" Ruth handed it over again, gentle as before. Tom scanned it, eyes flicking across the barcode. It beeped softly valid. "Of course." "Well," he murmured, "seems fine." She smiled. "It usually does when you read it right." Tom's grin faltered. "Yes, ma'am." He retreated to the galley. Evelyn glanced over his shoulder. "And it's real," he muttered. She exhaled through her nose. "Still looks out of place." Those words were quiet, but another attendant, Clara Nguyen, heard them. Clara was the youngest on the crew, 26th daughter of immigrants, the kind who carried kindness like second nature. The comment sat wrong in her stomach, back in her seat. Ruth adjusted the small cross on her necklace. The Bible rested on her lap, its edges worn soft by decades of use. She wasn't angry, only tired of moments like this that still managed to find her, even after a lifetime of patience. Evelyn returned with forced civility. "Mrs. Ellis, could I see your identification as well?" "Just routine." Ruth raised her eyes, calm but unwavering. "You've already seen my name and my ticket," she said quietly. "What more do you need?" Evelyn hesitated. "It's just policy, ma'am." Ruth reached into her purse, took out her driver's license, and placed it gently in the attendant's hand. Evelyn studied it longer than necessary before returning it. "Thank you," she said curtly. Ruth replied with a small nod. "Accuracy isn't your problem, dear. Assumption is—" The words landed like a whisper that could still echo. Evelyn turned away, pretending not to hear. The plane door closed with a hollow thud. The engines began to hum. Passengers adjusted their belts, some pretending not to notice the exchange. Yet curiosity lingered in every sideways glance. As the plane taxied, Clara passed through checking belts. When she reached Ruth, she paused, her voice softer than the others. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Ruth smiled. "Just some water. Thank you." Clara nodded. "Of course." In that brief exchange, kindness found a small place to breathe. When the aircraft lifted through the gray clouds, the morning light spilled through the window beside Ruth. She watched it scatter across the wing, thinking of her son, how hard he had worked to give her peace like this. He'd told her the night before, "Mom, just rest. You deserve to be seen, even if no one knows who you are." Now, somewhere above the Midwest. She wondered if he knew how right he was. Around her, the cabin settled into its rhythm. Tablets clicked open. The faint clink of ice filled glasses. But underneath, a quiet tension pulsed like static, the sense that something small yet heavy had begun to tilt the balance of the flight. Ruth turned her gaze back to the clouds. The world below looked peaceful from this height, untouched by human pride. She whispered a line from her favorite psalm, the one she always read before traveling. "He shall give his angels charge over thee." Her voice barely more than breath. Clara noticed and smiled to herself. There was something about this woman's strength dressed as stillness. Behind them, Evelyn scribbled notes on her manifest, irritation tightening her jaw. Tom leaned close. "You gonna let it go?" "She's sitting where she doesn't fit," Evelyn muttered, "and I intend to know why." The seatbelt sign dimmed. A small chime rang out. Ruth opened the Bible again, eyes tracing familiar verses. She didn't know yet that this flight would become a headline, that her quiet grace would shake an entire industry. For now, she was just a mother on her way to see her son, unaware that dignity once tested, was about to take flight. The engine steadied into their climb, a deep vibration that filled the cabin like a heartbeat. The early sunlight filtered through the windows in pale bands, casting soft gold over the neat rows of leather seats. To anyone passing by, everything looked calm. But under that calm, an unease had begun to grow. Evelyn moved through the aisle, her expression composed yet tight at the edges. She carried herself with the precise confidence of someone who had memorized every rule in the book, and perhaps had forgotten why those rules were written in the first place. Each glance she stole toward seat 2A held the same silent question. What is she doing here? Tom leaned against the galley counter, watching her. You're still thinking about her, he murmured. She's sitting up here like she owns the plane. Evelyn replied softly. Tom gave a light laugh. Maybe she does. You never know these days. Be serious, Evelyn hissed. We have an image to maintain. First class is supposed to be consistent. At that. Clara's hand paused mid-air while arranging napkins. She didn't say anything, but her eyes flicked toward them. Consistent, she thought. If consistency meant comfort for one kind of passenger and suspicion for another, what kind of service was that? When Evelyn returned to the aisle, Ruth Ellis sat reading quietly. Her glasses perched low on her nose, and the soft hum of a hymn escaped her lips. There was a serenity around her, the kind that made Evelyn's irritation sharpen into something harder to name. Evelyn spoke with her practiced courtesy. Mrs. Ellis, may I get you a beverage before breakfast service? Ruth smiled. Tea would be lovely, dear. Something with lemon, if you have it. Evelyn nodded, though her face didn't change. When she poured the tea, she let it cool longer than she should have. And when she handed it over, the cup rattled faintly on the saucer. Ruth steadied it with both hands, meeting her gaze just long enough for Evelyn to look away first. Across the aisle, a businessman named Mr. Lane noticed. He had seen these exchanges before in airports, restaurants, boardrooms, the way politeness could turn into a blade if handled wrong. He looked down at his tablet, pretending not to see, but something about Ruth's quiet dignity unsettled him. As breakfast service began, Evelyn distributed trays with mechanical precision. Eggs, toast, fruit, every detail identical except for one Ruth's tray arrived last. When it did, it was missing the small fruit bowl that sat on every other passenger's plate. Clara saw it and froze. She hesitated, tray in hand, then approached Ruth softly. I'm sorry, ma'am. Let me get you. Ruth touched her wrist gently. It's all right, sweetheart. I'm not hungry yet. Clara blinked back the sudden sting behind her eyes. She didn't know why it hurt, only that it did. When Evelyn passed by again, Ruth's calm voice rose slightly, not loud, just enough for the nearby passengers to hear. Excuse me, dear, you forgot something on my tray. Evelyn stopped, brows lifting. Everything you ordered is there. Ruth looked down, then back up. You forgot respect, but I suppose it doesn't fit on a tray. The words were quiet, but they cut clean through the cabin air. The businessman looked up again. Tom's smirk faltered. Clara froze, teacup trembling in her hand. For a brief second, no one breathed. Evelyn's smile stiffened. I'm sorry if you feel that way, ma'am. Ruth nodded once. Feeling isn't required. It's simply what's true. Evelyn turned on her heel and walked away, her pulse racing. She didn't understand why that woman's calm voice rattled her more than any angry complaint ever had. Back in her seat, Ruth gazed at the clouds outside the window. They looked soft, endless, untouched by all the small cruelties that people carried below. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines lull her into a memory one from years ago, when Marcus was just a boy. He'd come home from school crying because a teacher had mistaken him for another student who had misbehaved. "She said, 'All you kids look alike,'" he'd whispered. Ruth had knelt down, cupped his face, and told him gently, "Don't let someone else's blindness decide how brightly you shine." That memory warmed her chest now, even as her tea cooled untouched beside her. Clara returned quietly, setting down a small bowl of fruit on the table. "For you," she whispered. "I told them we found an extra." Ruth smiled. "Thank you, child. You didn't have to." "I know," Clara said softly. "That's why I wanted to." Tom noticed and frowned, whispering to Evelyn, "She's going to get herself in trouble taking sides." Evelyn snapped back, "She'll learn." Everyone learns where they belong. But in truth, Evelyn herself didn't feel certain anymore. Something about Ruth's composure was unsettling. There was power in that stillness, a quiet strength that made her own authority feel small. Midway through the flight, the captain's voice came on over the intercom, warm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'll be cruising at 35,000 feet for the next 2 hours. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight." The words barely faded before Evelyn's headset buzzed. A message from the ground staff flashed on her screen. Nothing unusual, just a system update about VIP travel logs. She scrolled absent-mindedly, then froze. One of the listed passengers for a connecting flight was Ruth Ellis, CEO of Helios Systems. Her eyes widened. The name was the same as the one on the boarding pass she had checked earlier, Ruth Ellis. Her stomach turned. For the first time, a flicker of doubt slipped under her pride. Could it be the same family? No, she told herself. Coincidence? It had to be. She closed the screen quickly, not wanting Tom or Clara to notice her hesitation. Meanwhile, Ruth had pulled a small photograph from her purse. A young man in a dark suit, standing beside a company sign with the words Helios Systems, building tomorrow. She smiled at it, her thumb brushing over the edges of the picture as though it were something fragile. Clara saw the photo as she passed. "Your son?" she asked softly. Ruth nodded. "Yes. He works too hard. But he's got a good heart." "What does he do?" "He runs a company that designs software for hospitals." Ruth replied, "Says he wants to make things fairer for people who don't always get seen." Clara smiled, warmth spreading through her. "Sounds like he learned that from you." Ruth laughed quietly. Maybe he did. Outside, the clouds parted to reveal the sunlit sprawl of the country below fields, rivers, highways glinting like silver threads. From this height, everyone looked the same. Evelyn walked past again, forcing a polite tone. "Is everything satisfactory now?" "Mrs. Ellis." Ruth looked up, meeting her eyes with that same steady kindness that made Evelyn falter. "Perfectly fine, dear," she said, "though I do hope you find peace up here in the sky. It can be lonely carrying judgment." Evelyn blinked, her throat tightening before she turned away. The rest of the cabin went quiet, as though everyone sensed that something far larger than a misunderstanding had just taken shape. Clara felt it most a shift, like the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. She didn't know it yet, but this flight would change the course of her own life. And for Evelyn Ross, it would soon become the mirror she could no longer avoid. The engines droned on, calm and steady, As the story of Seat 2A began its slow descent toward truth, the flight had settled into its rhythm screens flickering, trays clinking, and the hum of engines soft beneath the conversations of strangers. Ruth Ellis kept her gaze on the clouds outside her window. They rolled by like white mountains, serene and endless, a world untouched by human pride. To her right, Evelyn Ross adjusted her uniform collar, checking reflections in the glass of a cabinet. She had convinced herself she was only following policy, though the word policy had become a shield for something far smaller discomfort. Each time she passed Seat 2A, she felt an odd tension, like a reminder that her own sense of order could crumble with a single question. Tom leaned against the galley doorway, sipping his coffee. "You're still thinking about her?" "Huh?" Evelyn didn't look at him. "I'm doing my job." "Sure," he said, lowering his voice. "But maybe stop staring before she files a complaint." Evelyn's mouth curved faintly. If she knew how to complain properly, she wouldn't have boarded like that. Clara overheard. The words made her stomach twist. She kept folding napkins to hide her trembling hands. Minutes later, Evelyn pushed the cart back into the aisle, announcing meal service in a voice sweetened by protocol. "Breakfast options today are a warm omelet or fruit and yogurt parfait." She smiled toward each passenger as if nothing inside her was brittle. When she reached Ruth, the smile thinned. "And for you," Ma'am Ruth set aside her Bible. "The omelet sounds fine, dear." Evelyn hesitated, then said, "Unfortunately, we're short on that option. You'll have to take what's left." From the galley, Tom slid a tray toward her, one wrapped in plastic, the kind usually given to crew or standby staff. The foil crinkled as Evelyn placed it on Ruth's table. "There you go," she said lightly. "Catering issue. Happens all the time." Ruth looked at the tray, then at her. "Is that so?" Evelyn nodded, already turning away. "Then you should speak to your caterers, dear," Ruth replied softly, "because the rest of your passengers seem to have managed fine." A murmur spread through the first few rows. The businessman across the aisle lowered his tablet. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Clara stood frozen near row 3. She saw the color rise on Evelyn's neck. Ruth took a breath, steady but firm. "Please take this back," she said. "Excuse me," Evelyn asked. "I said take it away. I'd rather keep my hunger than eat your assumption." The quiet in the cabin deepened until even the hum of the engines felt distant. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. She snatched the tray and wheeled the cart away, her pulse hammering behind her polite expression. Tom muttered under his breath, "Well, she's got some attitude for a church lady." Evelyn shot him a warning look. "Just handle the rest of the row. In the galley?" She slammed the tray into the bin, the clang echoing louder than she meant. "She's trying to make me look bad," she hissed. Tom shrugged. "You're the one who gave her the wrong meal." "I did nothing wrong," she snapped. People like her always turn things into drama. Clara quietly entered the galley, carrying empty cups. "Mrs. Ellis wasn't rude," she said gently. "She just wanted to be treated like everyone else." Evelyn turned sharply. "You're new, Clara. You don't understand how things work up here." "I understand respect," Clara replied. "It shouldn't depend on where someone sits." Tom exhaled a slow whistle. "Careful," he muttered. "Evelyn hates lectures." Clara didn't answer. She just turned and walked back toward the aisle, heart pounding. Ruth sat quietly, her hands folded, her gaze on the distant horizon. She didn't feel angry, only tired. Tired of being mistaken, of having to explain her place. Yet she held herself straight, every breath a quiet declaration that dignity could not be taken by rudeness. The businessman leaned over slightly. "Ma'am," he said under his breath, "I'm sorry for what just happened. Some people forget how to behave." Ruth offered him a kind smile. "It's all right. Sometimes forgetting is how they learn." Her words lingered, soft but sharp, as if the air itself took note. Half an hour later, the cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled into silence. Evelyn used the moment to hide her unease, checking lists, avoiding glances, but guilt gnawed at the edges of her composure. Somewhere deep down, she knew she had crossed a line she couldn't name. Clara approached Ruth with a bottle of sparkling water. "Would you like some?" "Thank you, child," Ruth said. "You're very kind." Clara hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry for how they've treated you. It's not right." Ruth shook her head gently. "You don't need to apologize for someone else's blindness. Just don't catch it." That small exchange felt like sunlight breaking through a cloud. Clara smiled faintly and returned to her work, her chest heavy with admiration. In the galley, Evelyn's headset crackled. A message from the cockpit. The captain needed her to prepare the cabin for landing in 2 hours. She acknowledged it, then noticed Tom scrolling through his phone, grinning. "What's so funny?" she asked. "There's chatter on the crew group," he said. "Apparently there's a VIP connection waiting in New York. Some big tech CEO. Helios Systems. I think—" Evelyn frowned. The name tugged at something in her mind, but she pushed it away. She needed control. She needed the world to make sense again. When she stepped back into the aisle, Ruth was already looking up at her. And the older woman's expression held no anger, no resentment, just the unshakable calm of someone who had seen too much to be shaken now. Evelyn forced a polite tone. "Is everything satisfactory, Mrs. Ellis?" Ruth tilted her head slightly. "That depends. Dear, do you mean the flight, or the way we measure worth?" Evelyn blinked. "I beg your pardon." Ruth smiled. "No need to beg. Just something to think about. For the rest of the cabin." The exchange passed like a whisper. But for Evelyn, it landed like a stone dropped into deep water quiet, yet impossible to ignore. Later, as the plane began its slow descent toward the east, Evelyn noticed Ruth writing something in a small notebook. She wasn't sure why, but the sight unnerved her. Words, Evelyn thought, could live longer than moments. Tom leaned toward her, murmuring, "You handled it fine. Forget about it." But Evelyn didn't. She couldn't. The image of Ruth's steady eyes lingered, reflecting something she didn't want to see herself. In the final hour of the flight, the air seemed heavier, as if the plane carried more than passengers, something unspoken, waiting to unfold. Ruth closed her notebook, placed it beside her Bible, and whispered a line meant for no one in particular. Sometimes grace walks in silence until the world is ready to listen. She didn't know that the world was about to hear her loud and clear. The seatbelt sign flicked on with a quiet chime as the aircraft began its gradual descent. Outside, the afternoon sky above the east coast glowed with streaks of fading gold. Ruth Ellis closed her notebook, slipping it gently into her purse. She could feel the shift in altitude, the subtle pressure building behind her ears. And yet, what pressed heavier on her chest was something far less tangible. Evelyn Ross straightened her uniform and exhaled. Glancing toward the front cabin, she wanted the flight to end. Every glance toward seat 2A felt like a reminder she couldn't shake off, a silent challenge to her authority. "Let's make final checks," she said to Tom. Her tone clipped. "We'll be landing soon." Tom gave a nod, stretching lazily. "Yeah, sure. Can't wait to get off this one." As Evelyn moved past the first few rows, her gaze caught Ruth again, still sitting with perfect posture, her Bible resting on her lap, eyes calm as ever. That serenity unnerved her. It was as if the woman's very presence had unspoken judgment. Evelyn quickened her pace, pretending to busy herself with passenger forms. Then, from the cockpit, a new message came through her headset, a last-minute seating discrepancy report. She frowned at the screen. The system showed an alert seat 2A flag duplicate on manifest. It wasn't common, but it happened with misprints. She saw it as a chance to regain control, to reassert the order she felt slipping away. She turned to Tom. "There's an issue with 2A. It's duplicated in the manifest. Protocol says we confirm the seat with the passenger again." Tom raised an eyebrow. "You sure we're about to land?" "Exactly," she replied. "Better to fix it now than deal with paperwork later." She squared her shoulders and walked back toward Ruth's seat. "Mrs. Ellis," Evelyn began, forcing a polite smile. "I'm afraid there's been a mix-up in the records. It appears your seat is duplicated. We'll need to reseat you and coach for landing, just for compliance." The words landed like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. A few passengers turned their heads. The businessman across the aisle blinked in disbelief. Ruth looked up, confusion softening her features. "I'm sorry, dear." "What did you say?" Evelyn repeated herself. "Slower this time. We'll need to reseat you and coach." The air thickened. Clara, halfway down the aisle, froze where she stood. Ruth's voice stayed gentle. "You've checked my ticket, my ID, my name. I've sat here quietly the entire flight. What more do you need from me?" Evelyn hesitated, but pride steadied her tone. "It's just procedure, ma'am." Ruth nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. She unbuckled her belt and stood, her movements deliberate, her back straight. The hush in the cabin deepened until even the hum of the engine seemed to dim. She looked directly at Evelyn. "If it's your policy, then I'll follow it. But I hope one day you realize what kind of policy you've chosen to stand behind." Evelyn's throat tightened, but she stepped aside. "Thank you for cooperating," Tom whispered under his breath. "Man, this is awkward." Clara's hands trembled as she clutched a stack of cups, her eyes filling with tears she couldn't show. Ruth gathered her purse and Bible, walking slowly down the aisle. The first-class passengers shifted uncomfortably as she passed. Some averted their gaze, others stared, shame already stirring in their chests. When Ruth reached the curtain that separated first class from the rest of the plane, Clara hurried forward. "Mrs. Ellis," she said softly, "please, you don't have to." Ruth stopped her with a small shake of her head. "It's all right, child. Some lessons take longer to reach their destination." Her words, quiet but certain, hung in the air long after she stepped through the curtain. The fabric swayed gently behind her, closing like a door on the silence she left behind. In the front cabin, Evelyn tried to steady her breathing. She told herself she'd followed the rules. She told herself it wasn't personal. But the murmurs from the passengers said otherwise. A man's voice rose low, but clear. "That wasn't right," said the businessman, folding his tablet. "You humiliated her for nothing." Evelyn spun around. "Sir, please remain seated. I'm doing my job. Your job," he said evenly, "is to serve people, not to sort them." The sentence hit her harder than she expected. She forced a stiff smile. "I'm sorry you feel that way." He leaned back in his chair. "You will be. Behind the curtain." Ruth found an empty seat near the front of the economy cabin. A young mother moved a diaper bag aside to make room. "You can sit here, ma'am," she offered, smiling kindly. Ruth thanked her, lowering herself into the seat with the same grace she'd carried all her life. The hum of conversation filled the air again. Softer here, less polished, but somehow kinder. Clara slipped through the curtain a few minutes later, under the pretense of checking passengers. She knelt beside Ruth's seat. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "They shouldn't have done that." Ruth's eyes were kind. "You did nothing wrong, dear. You saw. That's enough for now." Clara blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "You shouldn't have to accept this." Ruth gave a small smile. "Accepting isn't the same as surrendering. Sometimes you let them finish their story before you tell your own." From the cockpit, the captain's voice announced their final descent. Passengers adjusted seats and buckled belts. Evelyn's voice followed, tight and rehearsed, giving instructions as if nothing had happened. As the plane lowered through layers of cloud, Ruth kept her gaze fixed outside the window. The light broke through in pale streaks, glimmering across the metal wing. In that glow, she found peace, not in being right, but in knowing she hadn't lost herself to their cruelty. When the wheels met the runway with a soft thud, the cabin erupted in the rustle of movement. Overhead, bins clicked open. Passengers reached for luggage and jackets, but first class stayed unusually quiet. The businessman stood and turned to Evelyn. "You owe that woman an apology." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Sir, please take your belongings. She had every right to that seat." He pressed. "And you threw her out like she was invisible." Evelyn's composure cracked for a heartbeat. Then she said coldly, "Sir, this conversation is over." But it wasn't. Not for her. And certainly not for the airline. Down in economy. Ruth waited until the aisle cleared. She didn't rush. As she stepped into the jet bridge, her phone buzzed in her purse. She recognized the caller ID immediately. "Marcus." She hesitated, then answered. "Mom," came his voice, deep and steady. "You landed safe, I did," she said softly. "But something happened on your plane." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that carried both fury and restraint. "What do you mean, my plane?" Marcus asked quietly. "They moved me," she said. "They said I didn't belong." He didn't speak for several seconds. When he did, his voice was low and controlled. "Tell me their names." Ruth hesitated. "Marcus, please." "Mom, Evelyn Ross, and a man named Tom Bennett. There was also a young woman, Clara. She tried to help." Marcus exhaled slowly, his reflection visible in the glass walls of his New York office. "Go home, Mom. I'll take care of it." As she hung up, Ruth's heart ached not from humiliation, but from the knowledge of what would come next. Her son had inherited her calm, but not her patience for injustice. Outside the terminal, the evening light turned orange across the tarmac. Ruth clutched her purse close, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath for mercy, even toward those who hadn't shown her any. She didn't know that before the next sunrise, the name Ruth Ellis would be known in every newsroom across the country. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of Marcus Ellis's office in downtown Manhattan. The city pulsed far below, but inside the glass-walled room, silence reigned. He stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, eyes fixed on the skyline. The night had been sleepless. News alerts had begun circulating hours ago. A passenger removed from first class. A short clip recorded by another traveler. A woman's calm voice saying, "You forgot respect, but I suppose it doesn't fit on a tray." By dawn, that clip had 500,000 views. Marcus's assistant, Jordan, entered quietly with a tablet. "It's everywhere," he said, his tone cautious. "They're calling her, the lady in 2A. Marcus turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Has the airline responded?" "Not yet," Jordan replied. "But the board of Skylux Air just sent a request for a private meeting this afternoon." Marcus nodded. "Set it up." He walked to his desk, fingers brushing over a framed photo of his mother, the same gentle smile, the same unwavering eyes. He could hear her voice in his mind. Soft, but firm. "Don't fight fire with fire. Son, some battles need light, not flame. But light could also burn if you aimed it right." Across the city, in Skylux headquarters, chaos simmered beneath corporate calm. Reporters swarmed outside. Headlines glared across every screen. "Elderly black woman removed from first-class airline faces backlash." Inside a conference room on the 28th floor, CEO David Langston adjusted his tie nervously. "Who's handling PR?" he demanded. "We need a statement before noon." A communications director cleared her throat. "We're preparing one now. We'll call it a misunderstanding. Emphasize staff confusion." "Misunderstanding," another executive muttered. "It looks like discrimination. The video is bad. David, really bad." Before anyone could reply, the glass doors opened. Marcus Ellis entered. The room went silent. He wore a charcoal suit, simple but commanding. His presence carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't need to raise its voice. David stood quickly. "Mr. Ellis Marcus, thank you for coming. We're terribly sorry about." Marcus held up a hand. "Save the apology. I'm not here for PR. I'm here for accountability." A murmur passed through the room. David gestured toward a seat. "Please, let's talk." Marcus sat slowly, folding his hands on the table. "Last night, your crew humiliated a passenger because she didn't fit their picture of who belongs in first class." David shifted in his chair. "Yes, we saw the footage. It was unfortunate. That passenger," Marcus continued evenly, "was my mother." The words struck like a gavel. Gasps broke around the table. One executive whispered, "His mother," before the silence swallowed them again. Marcus leaned forward. "But this isn't about family. It's about what kind of company you've allowed to represent you in the air." David swallowed hard. "We're investigating. Those employees will be suspended immediately." Marcus's gaze sharpened. "Suspension doesn't fix culture. You don't need scapegoats. You need mirrors." David opened his mouth, then closed it again. A knock came at the door. An assistant stepped in, her face pale. "The crew just arrived, sir." "You asked for them." David looked uncertainly at Marcus, who gave a small nod. "Bring them in." Moments later, Evelyn Ross, Tom Bennett, and Claire Nguyen entered the room. They looked different without their uniforms, ordinary, nervous. Evelyn's chin was lifted, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion. Tom tried to feign indifference. Clara's gaze stayed low. David gestured to chairs. "Please, sit." Marcus rose instead. His voice was calm, but firm. "No, let them stand." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Mr. Ellis," she began, "I didn't know she was your mother." "That's exactly the problem," Marcus interrupted. "You shouldn't have needed to know. Respect isn't selective." Evelyn's composure faltered. "I was following procedure." Marcus looked directly at her. Procedure doesn't ask you to shame someone. You chose that. The words landed heavy, like stones dropped into still water. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Look, this is being blown out of proportion. We just did our jobs. Did your job, Marcus repeated quietly. Then tell me, Mr. Bennett, where in your job description does it say to strip someone of dignity? Tom had no answer. Clara finally spoke, voice trembling. Mr. Ellis, I'm sorry. I tried to stop it. I didn't do enough. Marcus turned to her, his expression softening. You saw what was wrong. That's more than most do. He glanced back at David. Your airline runs on image luxury, prestige, comfort, but none of that means anything if the people inside it forget humanity. David nodded slowly. You're right. We can't undo what happened, but we can change what happens next. Then start by listening, Marcus said. He stepped aside as the door opened again. Ruth Ellis entered, walking with quiet grace. She wore the same navy cardigan from the flight, her posture steady despite the flash of cameras outside the hallway. Gas rippled across the room. Ruth gave a small nod toward her son before turning to the executives. Good morning. I believe we have something important to discuss. Her voice carried warmth and steel in equal measure. Evelyn lowered her eyes. Tom swallowed hard. Clara looked near tears. Ruth placed a thin folder on the table, printed statements from other passengers who had reached out overnight, sharing their own stories of humiliation and bias. This isn't about one seat or one flight, she said. It's about what happens when people stop seeing others as human beings. The room was silent. I taught school for 40 years, she continued softly, and I learned that mistakes aren't the end. They're just the beginning if you're willing to learn from them. David cleared his throat. Mrs. Ellis, we're deeply sorry. We want to make this right. Ruth's eyes met his. Then don't just say it. Prove it. Because justice isn't in apologies, it's in change. Marcus nodded toward the two attendants. Evelyn Ross, Tom Bennett, you'll answer for your actions. Effective immediately. You're suspended without pay. But that's not where this ends. Evelyn looked up sharply. Excuse me. You'll both spend 3 months serving in the economy cabin under direct supervision, Marcus said. You'll see the faces of the people you once overlooked. Maybe then you'll understand what service means. Evelyn's mouth opened, then closed again. Tom muttered something under his breath, but no one spoke in his defense. Marcus turned to Clara. Ms. Nguyen, you'll help lead our new initiative. We're calling it Respect Above Class. You'll work directly with my team. Clara's eyes widened. Me, I don't deserve, Ruth interrupted gently. You do, dear, because you cared. Tears welled in Clara's eyes as she nodded silently. David Langston exhaled, almost in relief. Then it's settled. We'll support the program fully. Marcus gave a short nod, his expression unreadable. Make sure you do, because from this moment forward, the world is watching. When Ruth and Marcus stepped out of the conference room, the hallway erupted with flashes and microphones. Reporters shouted questions, voices overlapping. Ruth paused just long enough to speak clearly, her tone steady as the camera lights gleamed on her face. I didn't ask for revenge, she said. I asked for respect. Every passenger deserves to feel they belong in the seat they paid for, no matter what they look like. That's not kindness. That's justice. The cameras clicked wildly. As they walked away, Marcus whispered, Mom, you changed more than a policy today. Ruth smiled faintly. No, son. I just reminded them what was always true. Behind them, the glass doors of the boardroom closed, sealing in the silence of those left behind people forced, for the first time, to look at themselves clearly. The conference room had emptied, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than any argument could. The city outside glittered in the distance calm, unbothered, while inside the air carried the weight of something irreversible. Marcus Ellis remained seated for a moment, fingertips pressed against the table. He had spent his life fixing systems, designing order from chaos, but nothing had ever felt as personal as this. Ruth stood near the window, gazing at the skyline as if she were reading a book only she could understand. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle. You handled that with grace. Son, you didn't let anger speak for you. Marcus gave a faint smile. I wanted to, but you've always said anger burns the bridge before you cross it. Ruth turned toward him, eyes soft but steady. And you crossed it. The door opened behind them. David Langston stepped in, looking worn. Marcus, Mrs. Ellis, thank you for staying. There's something I'd like you to see. He gestured toward the glass wall where screens now displayed public responses, hundreds of posts, news headlines, and messages flooding the airline social media. Here she belongs. Im seat 2A. Respect above class. David's voice carried both awe and concern. Your story has turned into something bigger than we expected. We're being forced to confront the truth. Ruth nodded quietly. The truth was always there. People just chose not to look. David hesitated before asking, would you speak at our press conference tomorrow? The public needs to hear from you directly. Ruth shook her head. This isn't about my voice. It's about all the people who never get to speak. Marcus glanced at his mother, then back at David. She's right. This shouldn't be a spectacle. It should be a turning point. David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I understand, but the board wants reassurance. They want to see action, not just apology. Marcus stood, his tone calm but firm. Then let's show them action. You don't repair trust with words. You rebuild it with humility. A knock interrupted them. The assistant entered again. Sir. The crew is still waiting outside. They've requested a chance to speak privately. David looked uncertain, but Ruth gave a small nod. Let them in. Moments later, Evelyn Ross entered the room, followed by Tom Bennett and Claire Nguyen. None of them looked like the confident professionals they once were. Evelyn's posture had lost its edge. Her shoulders drooped slightly under the invisible weight of shame. Tom looked defiant, but uneasy. Clara stood a step behind, hands clasped, eyes red from crying. Marcus folded his arms. You wanted to speak? Go ahead. Evelyn hesitated. Mr. Ellis, Mrs. Ellis. Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. I've replayed that flight in my head 100 times since last night. I don't know why I did what I did. I thought I was being professional. But really, I was protecting something smaller. My pride. Ruth met her eyes. We all protect what we fear losing. Miss Ross, the question is, what do you fear more, losing authority or losing your humanity? Evelyn blinked rapidly, tears forming. I don't know anymore. Tom scoffed quietly. Come on. Evelyn, we're not villains here. We followed procedure. Marcus turned sharply toward him. Procedure didn't tell you to insult a paying passenger. Procedure didn't tell you to use humiliation as control. That was choice. Tom crossed his arms. So what? We're the bad guys forever. No, Ruth said softly. Only if you decide not to learn. Her words hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The sunlight through the window shifted. painting their faces in gold and shadow. Clara took a small step forward. "Mrs. Ellis, I wanted to say thank you. You made me realize silence can be just as harmful as cruelty. I should have done more." Ruth smiled gently. "You did something most people, don't you, saw." Marcus looked toward David. "This is what change looks like. Not press releases, not PR campaigns, just truth, spoken out loud." David nodded slowly. "We'll make it official. Every staff member from pilot to ground crew will go through empathy and dignity training, and I want you both." He gestured toward Evelyn and Tom to help lead it. "You'll face the people you once dismissed." Tom's eyes widened. "What you want us to teach them?" Marcus answered, voice low and steady. "Not teach. Learn. From the ground up," Ruth added. "Service isn't about hierarchy, Mr. Bennett. It's about heart." Evelyn wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "I'll do it," she whispered. "If I can help others see what I refuse to see." Tom looked away, jaw tightening. "I'll think about it." Ruth regarded him quietly. "That's all I ask." After they left, David exhaled heavily. "You just turned an embarrassment into a movement." Marcus smiled faintly. "My mother always said shame is a teacher if you're willing to listen." Ruth gave a soft laugh. "I said that about your homework, not national scandals." They both chuckled, the tension breaking for a fleeting second. But outside the glass walls, cameras were already waiting, and the world was spinning around the story that had taken flight. Reporters camped at the airline's entrance. Passengers shared their own experiences. Online stories of subtle bias, cold stares, misplaced judgments. Marcus stared out the window again. "You know," he said, "you didn't just change a policy. Mom, you gave people permission to see themselves." Ruth placed a hand on his arm. "Change isn't about punishment. It's about awakening." He nodded. "Then let's wake them properly." Later that afternoon, Skylux released a statement announcing their new reform program, Respect Above Class. Within hours, the phrase trended worldwide. Evelyn sat in her apartment, reading the headlines. Her chest ached as she scrolled through comments, some condemning, some forgiving, others simply sharing stories of their own humiliation. For the first time in years, she felt something deeper than fear, remorse, across town. Tom scrolled through his phone too, but his reaction was different. He read the coverage with a bitter smirk. "They're turning her into a saint," he muttered. "People love a victim." Clara's message appeared on a screen. "You still don't understand, do you?" He didn't reply. Meanwhile, Marcus prepared for the next day's announcement. His phone buzzed with congratulatory texts, requests for interviews, partnership proposals, but all he could think about was his mother's quiet resilience on that plane, the way she had stood up without raising her voice. That night, as Ruth sat in her living room, she watched the news replay the footage again. Her own voice echoed through the speakers. "You forgot respect, but I suppose it doesn't fit on a tray." She smiled faintly, shaking her head. "I didn't mean for all this," she murmured. Marcus, sitting beside her, replied softly. "Maybe not. But sometimes the smallest truths create the biggest echoes." Ruth leaned back in her chair, then let the echo do its work. Outside, the city lights shimmered across the river, and for the first time in a long while, she felt peace, knowing that something she'd endured in silence had finally found its voice. 3 weeks had passed since the press conference. The story of Ruth Ellis had stopped being a headline, but its echo still rippled across the nation. The phrase "respect above class" had turned into something bigger than a corporate slogan. It became a movement. For Skylux Air, the transformation wasn't easy. Overnight, their staff training manuals, marketing, and even uniforms were redesigned to reflect humility rather than hierarchy. Every advertisement now carried Ruth's simple words, "Respect doesn't have a seat number." At the center of the reform was Marcus Ellis. Though he wasn't part of the airline, he personally funded the first wave of leadership workshops. Real change, he had said at the opening session, doesn't begin with apology. It begins when people learn to look in the mirror. Evelyn Ross sat in the back row of that room on the first day of training, her heart thudding as Marcus took the stage. His presence unsettled her, not because he was powerful, but because he was everything she wasn't: calm, grounded, and unapologetically kind. When he spoke, his tone wasn't sharp, it was steady. The hardest part about prejudice, Marcus said, is admitting that it hides inside all of us. Not the loud hatred you can point at, but the quiet comfort of thinking you're better than someone else. Evelyn lowered her gaze. Each sentence felt like a needle, sewing through her composure. Beside her, Tom leaned back in his chair, muttering, "He's just preaching for the cameras." Clara turned her head. "Then listen quietly," she whispered. "You might learn something." Tom scoffed, but he said no more. Later that afternoon, the attendants were assigned their new roles. Evelyn and Tom were scheduled to serve in the economy cabin for the next 90 days. No exceptions. Clara was assigned as their supervisor, overseeing both service and behavior reports. Their first flight together was from New York to Dallas. Evelyn arrived early, wearing the same crisp uniform but with none of the confidence she once carried. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her name tag. Passengers filled the narrow aisles, families, construction workers, students with heavy backpacks. The cabin was loud, full of motion. For the first time, Evelyn felt the exhaustion of what she used to dismiss as lower service. She smiled at a young mother struggling with her child's stroller, but the woman barely noticed her. Tom grumbled as he pushed the beverage cart. "This is ridiculous. They're treating us like we're in detention." Clara replied softly, "Maybe it's not punishment. Maybe it's perspective." He rolled his eyes. "Perspective doesn't pay bills. Neither does arrogance," Clara said, her tone calm. As they moved down the aisle, Evelyn caught herself watching the passengers more closely. She saw small details she had never noticed before: the tired eyes of a nurse on her way to a night shift, the gentle way an older man helped his wife with her belt, the quiet patience of a soldier sitting by the window. For the first time, she realized something that struck her harder than Marcus's speech. Everyone here carried a story, just like Ruth had, and all her years of maintaining standards had blinded her to that truth. When the flight landed, she lingered at the gate, helping an elderly woman retrieve her bag. "Thank you, dear," the woman said. "You have kind eyes." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I'm learning to use them better." Tom, however, stayed unchanged. In interviews with internal HR, he claimed he was being scapegoated for political correctness. He refused to see the bigger picture. Meanwhile, Clara flourished in her new role. She poured her heart into developing the Respect Above Class program. Under her direction, Skylux launched empathy simulations. Staff members swapped roles with passengers, experienced flight delays from the other side, and practiced active listening instead of scripted apologies. Marcus often attended these sessions quietly, sitting in the back, observing. When asked why he stayed involved, he simply said, "Because respect isn't a campaign, it's a habit." Ruth watched all this unfold from afar, through news updates and short calls with her son. She didn't like attention. but she loved seeing people change for the better. Sometimes she'd clip newspaper articles and tuck them inside her Bible. Small reminders that the world still had room for goodness. One evening, Evelyn knocked on Marcus's office door. She stood in the hallway, clutching a manila folder. "I wanted to give you something," she said when he looked up. Marcus gestured for her to come in. She placed the folder on his desk. Inside were handwritten letters from passengers she'd served in economy, notes of gratitude, compliments, even one from the young mother with the stroller. "Thank you for helping me that day. It meant more than you know." Evelyn's voice trembled. "I used to think respect was about authority. Now I see it's about empathy. I just wanted you to know your mother taught me that, without ever raising her voice." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Change doesn't erase mistakes, Ms. Ross, but it proves they didn't define you." Evelyn blinked back tears. "Thank you." After she left, Marcus called his mother. "You remember Evelyn Ross?" he asked. "Of course," Ruth replied. "Has she found peace?" "I think she's on her way," he said quietly. Ruth chuckled softly, then let her keep walking. By the next month, the story of Skylux's transformation had spread far beyond aviation. Universities used the Seat 2A case in ethics classes. Companies across industries started adopting dignity training. The movement that began with one woman's humiliation had become a symbol of accountability. Not everyone changed, though. Tom Bennett's defiance finally caught up with him. When he made a sarcastic remark about a passenger during a live flight, another crew member reported it. Within a week, he was dismissed. When the news reached Evelyn, she didn't gloat. She just whispered to Clara, "I hope he learns what I did before it's too late." Clara placed a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe your lesson will be his mirror." At the next company meeting, Marcus addressed hundreds of employees. Ruth was in the front row, wearing her simple cardigan, her presence commanding more respect than any title ever could. "This journey," Marcus said, "started with a moment of silence, a silence my mother held when others raised their voices. But silence, when rooted in dignity, speaks louder than noise." Applause filled the room. Ruth smiled, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. Evelyn and Clara exchanged a glance, two women from different worlds, both changed by one lesson, that kindness is not weakness and humility is not loss. As the crowd stood in ovation, Ruth leaned toward her son and whispered, "Now they see what I meant about light, not fire." He smiled. "You were right, Mom, but sometimes the light needs someone brave enough to hold it up." The audience's clapping thundered like the echo of justice itself, a reminder that respect, once learned, can never be unlearned. The autumn sun fell low over New York City, casting amber light across the glass towers of Midtown. Inside the Skylux headquarters, final preparations were underway for a major press event. It had been 90 days since Respect Above Class launched, and for the first time, the airline had begun to regain public trust. The lobby buzzed with anticipation. Journalists, cameras, and employees from every department gathered to witness what Skylux called the New Sky Initiative. Ruth Ellis stood near the back, quietly observing. Though he wasn't part of the airline, he had been invited as an honorary guest. His mother, Ruth, had declined public appearances since the scandal, preferring to watch from home. "The stage belongs to those who've learned," she'd told him that morning. At the podium, David Langston adjusted his tie. "Today," he began, "we celebrate more than corporate reform. We celebrate people, our passengers, our crew, and those who showed us that dignity flies higher than status." Applause followed, warm and genuine. In the front row sat Evelyn Ross and Clara Guillen. Evelyn wore her uniform again, but this time it felt different. She carried herself with quiet grace, not pride. Claire smiled encouragingly beside her. David continued, "It's easy to issue apologies, harder to prove them. No, but thanks to our respect-above-class team led by Clara Guillen, we've made empathy a core part of who we are." The crowd clapped as Clara stood, cheeks flushed. She bowed slightly, glancing toward Marcus, who gave her a proud nod. Then David added, "And there's one more person who deserves recognition, someone whose humility turned her mistake into a lesson for us all. Ms. Evelyn Ross." A hush fell. Evelyn's heart pounded as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Slowly, she stood. "I don't deserve applause," she said into the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "But I do want to say something." The room quieted. Even the clicking of camera shutters paused. "I used to think respect was something you earned through position," Evelyn continued. "That first-class passengers deserved more. That status meant worth. But one woman taught me how wrong I was by staying calm while I stripped her of dignity she never owed me to begin with." Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. "I've spent the last 3 months listening instead of speaking, serving instead of ordering. And I learned something simple: respect isn't a policy. It's a choice. Every single day." Applause broke out, not thunderous, but heartfelt. People weren't clapping out of politeness. They were acknowledging a transformation. From the side of the stage, Marcus watched her with quiet pride. He knew forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it created the space for growth. Yet, far from the spotlight, a different story was unfolding. In a small diner on the city's outskirts, Tom Bennett sat hunched over a half-empty coffee cup. His uniform had been replaced by a wrinkled sweatshirt, his name tag long gone. On the TV above the counter, Skylux's event streamed live, a story that began with one woman, a mother, and a seat she refused to surrender, said the anchor. Tom glared at the screen, bitterness twisting his expression. "They're all saints now," he muttered. "While I'm the villain." The waitress pouring coffee paused. "That's the airline lady." "Right. The one who got humiliated." "Yeah," he snapped. "And somehow I'm the devil because I followed the rules." The waitress studied him for a moment. "Maybe you followed the rules," she said quietly, "but you forgot the people." He looked away, her words stinging more than he'd admit. Back at the event, David gestured for Marcus to join him on stage. "Mr. Ellis," he said, "none of this would have happened without you or your mother. Would you like to share a few words?" Marcus stepped forward slowly. The crowd hushed again. "I didn't come here to celebrate success," he began. "I came to remind us that change isn't an event, it's a habit. My mother didn't fight for headlines. She fought for respect, for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." He paused, letting the silence settle. "Justice doesn't need noise. It just needs people who won't look away." The audience stood in applause. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment his calm composure, the quiet conviction that commanded attention without force. Later that evening, as the lights dimmed and guests filtered out, Evelyn approached Marcus privately. "I heard your mother couldn't make it," she said softly. "She doesn't like crowds." Marcus replied, "But she's watching." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Tell her thank you for teaching me what real strength looks like." "I will," he said. Outside, the autumn wind rustled through the city streets. As Marcus walked toward his car, His phone buzzed. It was his mother. "Hi, Mom," he said, smiling. "I saw you." Ruth's voice came warmly through the speaker. "You spoke from truth, not anger. I'm proud of you." He leaned against the car, looking at the skyline. "You always said truth shines best in silence." "You were right," Ruth chuckled softly. "You're learning." Before hanging up, she added, "Remember, son, forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the doorway to change." Meanwhile, Clara and Evelyn shared a quiet moment near the entrance. "You did great," Clara said, adjusting her coat. "I just told the truth," Evelyn replied. "Finally." Clara smiled. "That's what makes it powerful." As they walked out into the cool evening air, Evelyn glanced up at the night sky. For the first time in months, she felt lightness, like she'd finally let go of the weight she'd been carrying since that flight. At that very moment, miles away, Ruth closed her Bible and looked out her window at the stars. Her reflection in the glass seemed to whisper back the same truth she had lived by all her life. Dignity isn't given, it's remembered. Across social media, the story of Skylux's transformation exploded again. Hashtags returned. Marxitue. Respect above class. Dignity flies. But this time, the tone was different. It wasn't outrage. It was inspiration. People shared stories of their own moments of quiet courage, small acts of kindness that changed someone's day. The scandal that once divided, now united. The next morning, Marcus arrived at his office to find an envelope waiting on his desk. Inside was a short letter, unsigned, but instantly recognizable. "Mr. Ellis, you were right. It wasn't about rules. It was about heart. I don't expect forgiveness, but I finally understand. T.B." Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully. He placed it in the same drawer where he kept his mother's first boarding pass from that fateful flight. He smiled faintly, whispering, "Even the stubborn can learn." That evening, he called Ruth again. "Something tells me your story isn't done yet, Mom." Ruth's laughter drifted through the line. "No story worth telling ever really ends, son. It just teaches." As night settled over the city, the light from her window glowed steady a beacon, quiet but enduring, like the truth she'd carried all her life. The story of Ruth Ellis reminds us that true strength doesn't always roar, it often whispers through patience, grace, and quiet conviction. In a world quick to judge by appearances, she showed that dignity is not about status or wealth, but about how we treat one another when no one is watching. For older generations who have faced both change and challenge, Ruth's story carries a familiar truth: we cannot control how others act, but we can always choose how we respond. Her calm defiance, her refusal to let anger rule her, turned humiliation into healing and judgment into justice. Life will always place us in moments where pride tempts us to shout, but wisdom teaches us to stand tall without shouting at all. Like Ruth, we can be the steady voice that turns cruelty into reflection and silence into strength. Dignity, once defended, can never be taken away. Thank you for watching and sharing this journey with us. If Ruth's story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more true stories of courage, justice, and compassion to life, because every view, every share, keeps hope alive.